Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Carol Speakerman, who is president of Speakerman Retail. Hi, Carol. How are you?
I'm doing great, Simon. It's great to be here with you.
Thanks. No, really appreciate your time coming on. And that doesn't sound like a UK accent. So tell us where you're based, Carol.
I'm actually based in Arkansas, in Northwest Arkansas, and so yeah, I can't drop this accent. Once I moved back, it just came roaring out.
Excellent. And I think we were just talking kind of off air. We're experiencing our autumnal seasonal change, wet and windy, and dark mornings, dark evenings. I think you've got it a bit brighter there at the moment.
And at the moment, it's the key phrase. It looks like the temperatures are going to drop tomorrow and send us headlong into winter.
Well, fingers crossed. Heading into it means that we'll be out of it as well. So let's look forward to spring and the summer coming around as quickly as possible.
You bet.
So, Carol, just tell us a bit about yourself. Give us a bit of an intro to your world and your life and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm a retail analyst, speaker, and B2B positioning coach, which is just a fancy way of saying that I help companies get credit for the great stuff they already do and make sure that they're ready for what's next in retail. And one of the ways that I do that is through my retail trajectories. These really underpin everything that I do. These are themes and calls to action that I'm constantly creating, connecting, and mapping across all kinds of categories, borders, business models, and touch points. You know, as complex as retail's become, they're really just shortcuts that help make sense of all the seemingly random stuff that's happening in retail so that my clients and the audiences that I speak to can wrap their heads around it and do something about it.
The world's changing, as you said. We're coming out of a war. We've got a global pandemic we've come out of. We've got hyperinflation, certainly in the UK. So is there one big change that you're seeing come through, or is it a number of small ones?
Well, there are a lot of big changes and, certainly macroeconomic changes, global changes that are very disruptive, especially to retail. But one fundamental truth underpins all of it and really encapsulates where retail's going in terms of how retailers operate and then how those who work in the retail ecosystem operate alongside retailers. And that is that retailers are no longer just places that sell stuff. They're starting to operate a lot more like those lean technology platforms that they've been partnering with, modeling their businesses against, and increasingly even acquiring. And these platforms now contain products, of course, as they always have, but also data, content, partnerships, new formats, services. And it's a ton of complexity and opportunity that didn't exist in retail even a few years ago. So the bottom line is retail isn't just about selling stuff anymore. It's about platform leverage. It's about platform positioning and platform monetization. And when I mention those trajectories, most of the trajectories that I'm talking about now that have sort of bubbled to the top are really about this, especially platform monetization. But this holds true for anybody who works in retail. And that's why I built my platform positioning workshops and masterclasses so that all these diverse companies that are now part of retail, another big change, retail isn't just retailers and people who sell to them. It's a lot of support companies, technology companies, health services, and so on. But it's so all these companies can unlock these retail B2B opportunities that are exploding as these platforms expand, but also do it by harnessing all the assets on their platform. So I have a repeatable, scalable process that helps take some of that complexity out of all that and allows companies to position platform to platform instead of just, again, thinking of selling stuff to retailers because those days are sort of in the past.
So you talked about kind of some big changes there and that if retailers just thought of it as they had done kind of 20 years ago, 10 years ago, unfortunately they're probably not with us now or they've been consumed by some of the bigger people. And you also mentioned these trajectories, retail trajectories. So which big ones should we be watching out for? Are there a kind of, have you got a hit list of things that people should be considering?
Yeah, I definitely have a hit list. At any given time, I'm tracking 40 or 50 trajectories, but they tend to sort of they're all connected to one another generally, and then they tend to cascade down from some of those bigger ideas. So to answer your question, I would say there are two mega trajectories that are guiding all the others right now, and that is diversify or die and buy, build, or bridge. Now, diversify or die is really a call to action because diversification is the growth engine of the future for retail. Before it used to be store growth, and for some retailers like dollar stores, it still is. But increasingly, it is about diversification. And that means diversifying into new business models, into new formats and new categories. And retailers are getting really creative about how they drive that diversification, which leads to the second big trajectory: buy, build, or bridge. This is the big question, really, that's keeping retailers up at night, whether it makes more sense to make an outright acquisition, whether they should build solutions internally, or rely on outside partnerships and sort of bridge those innovations in order to stay ahead of all the change. But the most successful retailers are actually doing all three at the same time. So the question becomes, is this a buy, a build, or a bridge situation? And it's right now, retailers have made a lot of those decisions. So we're entering into a phase where they're starting to migrate between those choices. In other words, maybe they build a bridge with a partner and then say, we've learned a lot from you. Now we're going to take it internally and build it ourselves. So now we're starting to see some migration between those models. But either way, I think the good news, especially for those folks that provide solutions and services in retail, is that retailers no longer think they can do everything themselves. They're out of that mindset of just purely building. And after years of making lots of acquisitions, mainly to build up their digital capabilities, now they're leaning really heavily into partnerships. And I think that's just because it's worked out for them and it's a lot more agile model.
Yeah, it's interesting. And on that diversify or die note, does that mean I have to really understand my customers, because I could diversify and kind of alienate a group of those customers, but on the other hand, I could get a new group of customers? Or is it about attracting different customers, or a mix of both?
In general, I mean, what you say is so true, that there are so many different types of customers, and retailers have learned the hard way that they can't just, create these personas anymore or make assumptions even about the behavior of a single shopper, because they change their mind, depending on any number of variables, including the time of day. And that's one of the things that's made it so difficult for retailers to plan their business. But to me, it all rolls up to one truth, and that is that for shoppers these days, choice and convenience are basically synonymous. So it becomes not about like, how do we figure out how to narrow this down to these particular types of customers? It's actually, how do we blow this up? And going back to that platform proposition, how do we build our platforms in such a way that we can meet all of these diverse customers where they are, where we can offer choices to them and not make them feel like we're corralling them into options that are more profitable for retailers or easier for them to execute? It's not fun for retailers to have to operate that way, but it really is the way things have to be.
Yeah, and the buy, build, or kind of bridge debate, that's been, I think you've expanded on that, but certainly in the UK, we're seeing a really polarized view, I think, between that build, certainly that build and buy part of that trajectory, in terms of very, very much led by the senior IT team. So we see some organizations have a really, really strong, let's go out and get the best in class for our till system, or real experts that have spent years developing it and honing that technology to get it right, through to others who are much more, actually, nobody can really, really do what we want for our business because we're unique, but then every retailer will tell you they're unique. Let's build our own. And we see that almost waves of change, because somebody senior at an IT level will leave and all of a sudden they'll go build. Somebody at that company will then move out in a couple of years and all of a sudden they'll go buy. Is that sound familiar? Does that resonate?
Absolutely. In fact, it goes right back to what I was just saying about that migration between those models. And to your point, some of those migrations are led by changes within organizations and even cultural changes. But especially when you're talking about IT, the building piece becomes, and the buy piece becomes pretty attractive as retailers want to own more of their data and want to sort of have firewalls around it.
Yeah, and data's probably more valuable than anything on the earth now, isn't it? If you've got the right data across your customer base, your supplier base, to use the technology and the algorithms that are available to, back to the original point, start to diversify and give people a broader choice to come and buy for you and become, I suppose we call it in the UK, more sticky in terms of I'm your number one choice for all these products or ranges, and actually, I've seen you do all these other ones now, so you're even more in my first choice to go to for X, Y, and Z product.
Yep, and it is about keeping those folks, not only just attracting them, but keeping those folks playing on your platform, and then that leads to all kinds of benefits for retailers, which actually is where a lot of my other trajectories are addressing right now, is what they're doing with that data and with this platform power that they now have.
So data must lead to marketing, is my guess. So online marketplace advertising, whether that be Google Ads or Instagram or maybe not Twitter now with Elon Musk, but we'll see. So is that one of the trajectories? Is there something around there in terms of advertising and marketing?
Boy, is there. One of my top trajectories that I'm doing entire presentations on this year and have been for the last several months is something that I've been forecasting for years, and it's just completely taken off. And that is that retailers have gone mad for ads. And this is all part of an overall separate trajectory, how retailers are moving into solutions and services. Again, not just selling products, but as an outcropping of that, the ad business has quickly become the rule rather than the exception. I mean, so many retailers out there, from Carrefour to Walmart to Kroger, and really, again, the rule rather than the exception, that they are building their own internal ad capabilities because they're harnessing the data that they've collected, that very valuable first party consumer data, and they're saying, hey, why would we send our brands to outside ad agency when we have all this data on our platforms? Again, a platform monetization play, and we can serve it back to them and, provide a lot of value to them. And we have all the knowledge about these customers. So retailers really are the new media, and it's the ultimate diversification play. And also, too, these ad houses are helping them hedge against so many of those product-based headwinds that have provided, been such a challenge lately, like the supply chain snags, inflation. So the ad business is very, very profitable. In fact, Walmart, even though they had a 125 basis point dip in margins for their second quarter, their ad business was up 30%. So retailers, it really is a no-brainer. They're looking at it as just a terrific way to monetize their platforms, and also a way to become, using your term, more sticky with their brand partnerships.
And that's across all media now. So historically it was focused on television, wasn't it, I suppose, and paper, but now we're much more the social apps, the social channels and all that play. So is it much more kind of integrated thought process around which channels hit the people that they're trying to target based on the data they've got?
All of that is in the early stages, and you just asked the key question, because not only is it, you could say it's a challenge or an opportunity to aggregate all of those touch points, but those touch points are going to keep exploding as retailers continue another trajectory that I call the digital rethinking of physical retail. Because I think really starting in 2023, going into next year, we're going to see so much focus on the store. I'm calling it the year of the store. And with that, there are going to be a lot of digital elements and technologies unleashed in the store environment. That's going to fuel retailers' ad businesses because they'll be able to collect more robust data, very similar to the way they've been doing it in the digital space. And that really is going to change the game in terms of how they reach out to shoppers too. So that will increase the number of touch points to include not just, online and in store and social media, but there will be, more immersive devices unleashed that will, be integrated into retail. And again, it's going to get very complex, but I think it's also going to be really exciting.
And what excites you most?
I'm sorry?
What excites you most in that space? If next year 2023 is the year of the physical store, what gets you kind of most excited about the kind of automation, people power, the rethinking of the physical retail space?
I think really just the opportunity for, I think the renaissance that will happen in physical retail is exciting because, there's so much pent up demand for in-person experiences. And, there's going to be a lot of hiccups. There's going to be a lot of learning involved because, as we talked about earlier, different shoppers want different types of experiences. Plenty of shoppers are not ready to go headlong into high tech. I talk a lot about the spectrum between high touch and high tech. And, it inevitably, whenever you start lurching toward high tech, there's a bit of a backlash and shoppers sort of long for those more high touch experiences. So that goes back to the point about choice. And retailers are going to have a really delicate balancing act on managing that high touch to high tech spectrum to make sure that they're not alienating shoppers that aren't ready for that high tech explosion, but that they're also not lagging behind and not trying new things and embracing this digital rethinking of retail. So I'm watching some of the big guys out there, Walmart and others that not to mention some of those big tech platforms, Meta, Apple, and others, to see how all of this is going to come together and how it will transform in-store experiences. But it's going to take a lot of courage and a lot of testing and learning.
Yeah, and I think it's back to some of the things we saw in lockdown of kind of fail fast and move on. A lot of the bureaucracy sitting in the UK when we were in that period disappeared, and companies did stuff that was going to take them, 6-7 years on their roadmap in 3 weeks. Yes, it wasn't pretty. Yes, it wasn't necessarily as robust as it might have been, but actually it got them 50-60% of the way there. So it'd be an interesting space. And we've talked about it in the UK a lot about this experiential retail is going to be the way that you win. That clearly comes at some cost as well, because you've got to have really slick processes, maybe outside of your customer peak, or more people if you do that across the day. Because if experience and therefore service is the key, what you don't want, and it's tricky in some of these really big box, your Walmarts in kind of your world, supermarkets in our world, of stopping people being busy in task, because that's not experiential retail.
Absolutely. And, because the conversation before was always about frictionless and seamless between online and in store. But to your point, that's going to have to be the new goal for in-store experiences as they start to mimic online experiences, or the technology starts to increase in the store environment. And it's funny because for years, retailers, there was a period of time where retailers were trying to clear the clutter. There was a whole conversation around, let's get rid of all these shelf talkers and all this noise that started happening in the store when the first round of technology was starting to be introduced years ago. And there was a big backlash on the part of retailers where they said, we got to clean up this clutter. They were kind of letting the brands put all kinds of, gadgets and things in the store environment. And retailers thought it was compromising their brand experience, their overall brand experience. So I think that historical reference is helpful here, because retailers did that whole clutter clearing exercise and said, we're not having all this noise. And then now we're in a new phase of that, to where they're going to be able to build it back in a more hopefully streamlined and, to use that term, frictionless way, maybe learning lessons from the past.
And on topic, but slightly off topic at the same time, we talked about kind of collaborations before in kind of the buy, build, or bridge. We're seeing random's probably the right word, more, let's call it creative collaborations, where we've got maybe a well-known clothing retailer who's partnered with a car manufacturer because they've got overspaced stores. The car manufacturer wants to take the cars to where people are. So my wife's shopping for clothes, I go and browse and sit in a car. So do you think we'll start to see more synergies like that in terms of brands really, really, really understanding where the opportunity is that before might have seemed really abstract.
Yes, very much so. And in fact, that's part of that diversification story is diversifying not only distribution, but thinking outside the box in terms of who you can partner with. But it does go back to that platform leverage, because essentially what you're talking about is one entity having one platform and another one having another platform. So maybe one of them has a platform that is about, physical presence and having lots of stores, and the other one has a technology platform, and they, join forces. But also, too, one of my other trajectories that's been around for a while and just continues to evolve is what I call frenemy forays. That retailers and others have become newfound frenemies. In other words, they're partnering with their competitors, which was just unheard of years ago. So not only are we talking about partnerships like you mentioned that would seem to be non-competitive and synergistic, but just dead on competitors hooking up with one another and saying, hey, let's connect our platforms and, get as much business as we can. And that also kind of goes back to choice as well. And the fact that brands no longer have to limit their choices and their options in distribution. That used to be the case, but that's why you see so many of these digital brands now opening stores. It's why you see them opening stores and also maybe partnering for shop and shops within existing retailers. So it really is an all of the above world because there are so many options, and now everybody has permission to pursue them.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that if you then think about the challenges in the world today in the UK, we have a real challenge. There's more jobs than people. Certainly all your A players, difficult to retain them, got to pay them more, or they move on somewhere else. So we're seeing businesses with, plus 50, 60% churn. And in a world where it's based on experiential retail, there's as a customer, a unwritten rule that whoever you're speaking to is knowledgeable, has bought into the brand. That's going to be really tricky as well to deliver, isn't it? If I've got this continual churn of people that maybe don't even stay for 12 weeks, let alone 12 months or 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yes, it's a big problem because, there's the overall problem of labor shortages that everybody's dealing with. And again, it's not just the acquisition piece, just like with customers, it's not just about acquiring, it's about retention. And, retailers are having to pay more and more for this talent. And on top of that, as they do evolve into operating more like these technology platforms, it means that the skill sets for some of these employees have to be, the bar has been raised there as well.
Yeah.
So now we see retailers finding themselves in competition with technology companies for this talent, and everybody's just, grabbing for warm bodies. But they can't just be warm bodies. They have to be fairly skilled these days. So on as part of that, it's not very popular these days to talk about it, but yes, retailers are leaning into automation and automating more functions, particularly in store. Part of that is mitigating this labor crunch and saying, well, what can we automate? And then what do we truly need people to do? But it's good news in the sense that going back to that high touch that backlash against high tech and going back to high touch, I do think that some of these more experiential retailers that, again, maybe some of these digital brands that have decided to open stores and others, they have an opportunity to sort of zig while the others are zagging and focus on that customer experience and that one-on-one experience and, making sure that they're paying their employees well and, delivering on that experience rather than just thinking of store workers as a commodity.
Yeah. So we may end up in a world where there's theoretically less people in store, but those people are better paid, more knowledgeable, hopefully stay longer, which then transpires into this better service, the experience, and therefore delivers hopefully higher sales margin, etc., etc.
I think you just described the perfect world, but it's pretty elusive to get there.
Well, I say the journey's long, and I think you said zig and zag before that. Yeah, there's many zigs and zags and U-turns and dead ends on the journey, unfortunately. Otherwise, everyone would be there, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, that's the truth. But I think that it's moving in a good direction, and you know, there are shoppers too who really don't like the idea of automation replacing people, and so retailers have to be careful about that too, just from a perception standpoint, that they're not perceived as putting people out of work. It's you listen to some of the focus groups on that, and it's kind of shocking how much shoppers watch that and really, don't like it.
Yeah, and I suppose an example of that in the UK is we've seen the Amazon Go stores. There was a glut of them, I think 8, 10 in an initial wave, and then they pretty much pulled back now because it just doesn't give us as shoppers in this country as a majority what we want. Works for some people, clearly, in and out for lunch in a city, great, but majority wise didn't really hit the mark with the shoppers. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out in the next 5 or 10 years, won't it? And how much progress we've made and how many people have managed to straighten that road and kind of accelerate up it.
Well, what's interesting is, we think that all of this automation originates in the U.S., but it was really in the U.K., with Waitrose early on and others that pioneered those dark stores and, some of that automation that got the ball rolling. And they really haven't taken off with scale, but it served as an inspiration for retailers in the U.S. to start exploring more of these automated type concepts. And I do think that opened up more retailers to being receptive to using Amazon's technology and sort of, playing with it and seeing how far they want to go with it. But like I said, a lot of that started in the UK, so we can blame you guys for that.
Yeah, we'll take it on the chin. That's fine. That's fine. So, Carol, it's been amazing to talk. Loved hearing about kind of the trajectories. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, have a deeper conversation, where's the best place for them to find you?
You can go to my website at speakermanretail.com, and that's where you'll find my latest speaking engagements, my media contributions, my podcast. That's another way you can find me. It's on my website at speakermanretail.com. The podcast is Speakerman Speaks Retail, and it's on all of the major podcast platforms. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Carol Speakerman, and on Twitter at Retail Expert, XPERT.
Brilliant. And we'll put those in the notes so people can just click through and find them a little easier. Thank you. No problem. Final question from me is, what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given? It's one that everybody gets, and I know it's on the spot, but what comes to mind?
The best business advice I've ever been given is probably that people are always buying and doing business, and why shouldn't it be with you? I think that sometimes we get caught up in these periods of gloom and doom, and we say, boy, everything's just collapsing. But whether you're a retailer, a brand, a consultant, a speaker, whatever your business is, know that somebody out there wants what you have, and it's just a matter of connecting to that. And I think that's a much better attitude to have than, again, just to sort of buy into a lot of the gloom and doom and assume that, it's a struggle for everyone.
Brilliant. Nice positive one to end on. Lovely. Well, appreciate your time, Carol. It's been lovely to talk and catch up, and I'll see you soon.
You bet. Thanks, Simon.